Why is knowing this about youth important? Gender identity and sexuality can be complex for youth, and by gaining an understanding, you can help youth. Research shows that those who felt greater social support from parents and other community members tended to have fewer depressive symptoms and fewer suicide attempts. If those youth had parents who did not know their LGBTQ identities, those youth were linked with greater depressive symptoms. We live, study, and work in a diverse gender and sexually oriented society. Today's children and youth are growing up in a completely different world. It is very important to acknowledge and create an environment that respects and celebrates our differences in gender identities, sexual orientation, and expression. Creating an inclusive culture prevents children and youth from experiencing distress, discrimination, bullying, and ultimately negative health outcomes. Creating a respectful environment helps queer, transgender, and gender creative children lead happy, healthy, and confident lives. First, we're going to go over some gender identity terms to familiarize you with some of the most common gender identities in the LGBTQIA plus community. The first one we're going to go over today is agender. So, agender is a person that's not having a gender or identifying with a gender. They may describe themselves as gender neutral or genderless. Also, can describe themselves as not having um, or having a lack of gender. They see themselves as neither a man nor a woman or both. They're gender neutral and often are described as gender free. This one we're Bigender is a person who fluctuates between traditionally male and female gender-based behaviors and identities. So basically, it's a gender identity, which literally translates as two genders or double gender. Bigender people experience exactly two gender identities. These can either be simultaneously or varying between the two. These two gender identities, while usually male and female, can sometimes also include non-binary identities. If there are multiple identities instead of just two identities, that is considered multi-gender instead of bigender. A cisgender person has a gender identity that matches their sex assigned at birth. A person whose sex was assigned male at birth and identifies as a boy or a man, or someone whose sex was assigned female at birth and identifies as a girl or a woman, is considered cisgender. Gender fluid means that a person is flexible in regard to the gender with which they identify. Their gender identity or expression is not fixed and may encompass one gender, multiple genders, or even no gender. Their gender identity and expression may also change over time. Genderqueer is an umbrella term used to describe identities outside the gender binary. The term was first used in queer zines in the 1980s and predates the emergence of the term non-binary. Genderqueer can be used to describe a non-binary identity, but it can also encompass fluidity in gender identity or expression. It's a gender identity label often used by people who do not identify with being a man or a woman, or used as an umbrella term for many gender nonconforming or non-binary identities. Gender variance or gender nonconformity is behavior or gender expression by an individual that does not match masculine or feminine gender norms. A gender nonconforming person may be variant in their gender identity, being transgender or non binary, or they may be cisgender. Mix, a title like Mr. or Miss that is gender neutral, is often the option of choice for folks who do not identify as cisgender. Often this is left off of forms. The forms usually just say Mr., Miss, Mrs., and it leaves out a large population of non binary people who have to check a box that doesn't actually correlate with who they are. Non binary can mean different things to different people. Essentially, it's used to describe someone whose gender identity can't be described as exclusively a woman or a man. Some people who are non binary experience their gender as both man and woman, and others experience their gender as neither a man nor a woman. Non binary can also be used as an umbrella term encompassing many gender identities that don't fit into the man woman binary. Although being non binary is often regarded as a new phenomenon, history tells us that non binary identities have existed for many, many centuries. In the context of gender, passing is when someone is perceived as a gender or sex other than the sex they were assigned at birth. So when someone who is gender variant is regarded to be or passes as a cisgender man or cisgender woman, when they are actually a transgender man or a transgender woman, they are regarded as passing. Third gender is a term for a person who does not identify with either a male or female, but identifies with another gender. This gender category is used by societies that recognize three or more genders, both contemporary and historical, and is also a conceptual term meaning different things to different people who use it. Transgender is a term used to describe people whose gender identity differs from the sex they were assigned at birth. Gender identity is a person's internal, personal sense of being a man or a woman, or a boy or a girl. For some people, their gender identity does not fit neatly into these two choices. For transgender people, the sex they were assigned at birth and their own internal gender identity do not match. People in the transgender community may describe themselves using one or more of a wide variety of terms, including but not limited to transgender, transsexual, and non binary. So make sure you always use the term that the person wants you to use. Traditionally, Native American Two-Spirit people were male, female, and sometimes intersexed individuals who combined activities of both men and women with traits unique to their status as Two-Spirit people. In most tribes, they were considered neither men nor women, and they occupied a distinct alternative gender status. The genderbread person shows you how gender identity is located in the brain. And that is basically a scale from woman to man, with genderqueer being in the middle. And it's how you in your head think about yourself. It's the chemistry that composes you. and how you interpret what that means. So it's your brain and how you identify either as a man, as a woman, or anywhere in between. Gender expression is how feminine or masculine or in between you are. You express yourself. It's how you demonstrate your gender based on traditional norms, and through the ways you act, dress, behave, and interact. Biological sex is what you're assigned at birth, and that would either be male, female, or intersex. And sexual orientation is how you feel and who you're physically, spiritually, and emotionally attracted to, based on their sex or gender in relationship to your own. And that's what's in your heart. What is gender? So, gender is social and cultural, and it's how your identity relates to society's idea of what it means to be a man, a woman, neither, or a mix of many genders. Gender identity is a person's innate sense of their gender. It's how you internalize your sense of self and your gender, whether that is a man, a woman, neither, or both. It's the personal sense of what you feel your gender is. It can correlate with your person's assigned sex, which would be what a cisgender's person um, identity would be, or it can differ from it, and that would be what a transgender or non binary person's gender identity would be. But either way you look at it, it is the personal inner feeling of whether you're female, male, both, or neither. And your gender identity is not seen by others unless you express it through gender expression. Gender expression is how a person publicly expresses or presents their gender. This can include behavior and outward appearance, such as dress, hair, makeup, even body language and voice. A person's chosen name and pronouns are also common ways of expressing their gender. And others perceive a person's gender through these attributes. A person's biological sex usually refers to their status as female, male, or intersex, depending on the chromosomes, reproductive organs, and other characteristics. Do not mistake this for gender. Gender and biological sex are completely different things. With biological sex, you have male, intersex, or female, and those are based on chromosomes and genitalia and other identifying factors. But just remember that sex is not just these things. It's not always black and white, and chromosomes are not always X and Y. They are, but there are chromosomal crossovers and variations, and there's just so much more to science than what we can see from our perspective. Sexual orientation is a term used to refer to a person's pattern of emotional, romantic, and sexual attraction to people of a particular gender. Sexuality is an important part of who we are as humans. Beyond the ability to reproduce, sexuality also defines how we see ourselves and how we physically relate to others. When we think about gay in terms of sexual orientation, we think of it as the adjective used to describe people whose physical, romantic, and/or emotional attractions are to people of the same gender. So gay man, gay woman, gay people. It's used as a way to describe same-sex attraction throughout many different genders and groups. For example, in the first picture, we have two gay men, and in the second picture, we have a gay pride event. So we have a group of gay people celebrating their sexual orientation with each other in a group on the streets. A lesbian is a woman who is sexually or romantically attracted to other women. A bisexual person is a person who has the capacity to form an enduring physical, romantic, and or emotional attraction to those of the same gender or to those of another gender. People may experience this attraction in different ways and degrees over their lifetime. And bisexual people don't need to have had specific sexual experiences to be bisexual. In fact, they don't need to have had any sexual experience at all to identify as bisexual. So in this example, the first picture shows how the gentleman in the middle is kind of split between the man on the left and the woman on the right. And he can have romantic feelings and sexual feelings for both. Um, Probably not at the same time, uh, but he could be sexually attracted and emotionally and physically attracted to the man on the left just as much as he could be to the woman on the right. And it's the same with the picture up on the top where the man is daydreaming about another man and he is also daydreaming about a woman. So bisexuals are attracted sometimes equally or sometimes more so with one gender than the other, but they can see themselves with both genders. Pansexual individual is a person who has the capacity to form an enduring physical, romantic, or emotional attraction to any person regardless of gender identity. Pansexual people don't need to have had specific sexual experiences to be pansexual. They don't need to have had any sexual experiences at all to identify as pansexual, and they can have that attraction to any person. um, regardless, again, of any gender identity that that person may identify with. Queer is an adjective used by some people, particularly the younger generation, whose sexual orientation is not exclusively heterosexual. So, example, a queer person, a queer woman. Sometimes for those who only identify as queer, the terms lesbian, gay, and bisexual are perceived to be a little bit too limiting, and they don't really have feelings that those terms identify who they really are. And queer encompasses so much more of an identity than the boundaries of lesbian, gay, and bisexual. So they decide to go with queer as a label instead. On this slide, you see an example of different people who identify as queer. And although you can't ever really look at a person and say, I know that they identify as queer, it gives you an idea of how different people can be and still identify under the queer umbrella. Asexuality is the lack of sexual attraction to others, or maybe low or absent interest in or desire for sexual activity. It may be considered a sexual orientation or a lack thereof. It may also be categorized more widely to include a broad spectrum of asexual sub-identities, but an asexual person is really just a person who does not experience or experiences low sexual attraction. Aromantic is an umbrella term used by people who don't typically experience a romantic attraction. Romantic attraction can be defined as a desire to have romantic contact or interaction with an individual. Because aromanticism is such a complex term, I want to go over that a little bit more. So I want you to know that it is a romantic orientation. It's most commonly described for people who experience little to no romantic attraction to others. But that doesn't mean that they are asexual, even if they do overlap at times. It also doesn't mean that that aromantic people are unable to form any attachment to others. In addition to that, it doesn't mean they just haven't found the right person. And it also isn't one of those absence of emotions or feelings. It is an actual romantic orientation who which describes these people who experience no romantic attraction. They do have feelings. They can be asexual. They can form attachments. Um, they
would never find the right person and they still have emotions and feelings. They're just not romantic attractions. Bi-curious is similar to questioning, and people might say they're bi-curious if they're exploring whether or not they're attracted to people of the same gender as well as people of another gender. So in a way, they are questioning. A demi-romantic person is someone who only develops romantic feelings for another person when they have a strong emotional connection to them. Demi-romantic people can be of any gender identity or sexual orientation. Polysexual individuals are primary sexually, romantically, and/or aesthetically attracted to genderqueer, transgender, and/or non-binary people. Thank you for watching week 1 of my 3-week capstone series. Week 2 will be on communication techniques with LGBTQ youth, so be sure to tune in, and again, I appreciate you watching and listening. Thank you so much.